really no record you could look back on with Vice President Pence to see how he's going to handle it. And we know it's going to arise somehow. We've seen how she handles it on the campaign trail before, where she talks about her personal experiences. That little girl was me was a great moment in a debate that she had during the primaries. And so I would suspect that she will go there first.
Yeah, it's fascinating. How did they play it, actually, Jeannie?
I think Mike Pence has a tricky road tonight because, of course, they cannot alienate women, particularly suburban women. So anything he says that at all seems like he is being at all sexist, either in his tone or his words or anything else, is going to come back to them. So he's got to be very careful. I think he's got to stick to the record, and I think he should focus on Vice President Biden, former Vice President Biden, who obviously is at the top of this ticket. Vice presidential debates usually are about the top of the ticket, not the two people running as the vice presidential.
So, Rick, since last Friday at least, the news has been consumed with COVID-19, and particularly President Trump coming down and going to the hospital, coming back out. Until late today, I thought that maybe Kamala Harris would have to be a little careful attacking somebody who was sick. But then you had the president come out and do this. He tweeted out this video that said, you know, it was God's blessing that I got COVID-19 because I showed how I could triumph over it. Does that sort of let her take the gloves off a little bit?
She's got to be careful because the top of the ticket, Vice President Biden, as Jeannie just said, really controls the tone and tenor of this campaign. And he's been very empathetic with the president over his COVID diagnosis. And so I think she's got to be able to fit into that narrative, to be empathetic. It's what this administration, what the future administration of the Biden administration is selling, especially related to COVID. But I think she will have a sharp sword from time to time, but she's got to do it with a tone that's the happy warrior.
Oh, there you go. Let's go back to Al Smith. That's harkening back to bygone days. Okay, Rick and Jeannie are going to be staying with us through the night. And right now, let's go to Salt Lake City, where our chief Washington correspondent, Kevin Strilli, is standing by on location. So, Kevin, give us an update on what's going on out there in Salt Lake City.
New developments just as Vice President Mike Pence announcing some of his special guests who will be in the audience this evening. The campaign saying that he will be accompanied by at least one business owner who had their business destroyed in the unrest in Minneapolis. Clearly a sign that they will try to double down on the issue of law and order in his approach. I spoke with Rick Grinnell, who is, of course, the former ambassador to Germany, as well as the former acting director of national intelligence, just within the last half hour. He said that they want to see Senator Harris pinned down on the issues pertaining to the economy, to the Supreme Court, as well as energy policy. They are going to try to portray her as someone who is incredibly liberal. In contrast to that, I spoke with former South Bend Mayor of Indiana, Pete Buttigieg, just about how they will try to portray Mike Pence. Take a listen to what he told me.
How are we actually going to end this pandemic that the administration failed to contain? How are we going to bring back an economy that actually works for everybody, with so many Americans just getting blow after blow, especially with this latest news that the president's walking away from negotiations on relief? These are the things I think most people are tuning in, wanting to hear about.
Now, of course, the Trump campaign looking to have some type of major shift in the trajectory of this race. They feel that they are still questioning the legitimacy of those polls that came out today from Quinnipiac that show him trailing in battleground states.
So, Kevin, let me ask one other question. There's a political report out today, as you probably saw, that another guest who's going to be there, invited by the Vice President Pence, is actually the parents of Kayla Mueller. That's that woman who very tragically was kidnapped by Islamic State and ultimately murdered over there. Is terrorism going to be a big issue for the Vice President, at least tonight?
Yes, and in fact, specifically, Rick Grinnell told me that they are not only going to try to link Senator Harris to the protesters, but also to various statements that the protesters have made. If there was any indication that this might be a more substantial debate, maybe they won't be speaking over one another, but based upon my reporting, it will be incredibly contentious.
Okay, Kevin, thank you so much. We'll be coming back to you. Good luck out there in Salt Lake City. In the meantime, coming up next here, we're going to talk with Joe Watkins about what we can expect from this debate tonight. This is Bloomberg. This is special coverage of the vice presidential debate on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Vice presidential nominee Kamala Harris makes history tonight as the first black American female to take the debate stage. To discuss the significance of her accomplishment in American politics and the current state of race relations, we welcome now Joe Watkins. He's former White House aide to President George Herbert Walker Bush and host of State of Independence at joewatkins.org. So, Reverend, it's great to have you with us. Talk to us, if you would, if you're willing.
Thanks so much, David. Great to be with you.
Well, talk to us about the significance of having this first. She's a black American. She's also an Indian American, the first woman of color nominated to be vice president.
This is huge, of course. I mean, Joe Biden picked her as his running mate because he wanted to make sure that he would have a great turnout, that he would energize his base of support, especially among African American men and women. And this clearly does that. We all know that polls are one thing, but turnout really matters on election day. It's the number of people that actually show up at the polls to vote. And in order for that to happen, they've got to be energized. They've got to be energized to show up at the polls to vote on election day. So Kamala Harris is somebody who Joe Biden has on the ticket to accomplish that purpose. And we know that she's a very, very skillful prosecutor, that she'll do very, very well, as she has in the past in a debate format. And Mike Pence will do well as well. I mean, Mike Pence is a very skilled debater and very, very good in these kinds of settings. So it'll be a very, very good contest tonight between Kamala Harris and Mike Pence. But I think Kamala Harris is poised to do well.
So, Joe, it's not just the history. I don't want to make light of that, but not just the history of the first woman of color, but race relations are very much on the national agenda right now, given the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. So how is she going to handle that as a prosecutor, but also as someone who has really stood up for racial justice?
I think she'll probably point to her record and talk about the injustices that have taken place for people of color around the country, especially with regards to the use of excessive force in some of these instances by police. And she'll talk about it passionately, I think, and at the same time prosecute it in a lawyerly fashion about this injustice and why it needs to end. I think that's something that a lot of voters of color who are watching tonight will look to see and will want to hear. This is a time when the country, of course, has been pretty racially polarized, and so just having her on the stage is important. But likewise, her capacity to talk about these events and to talk about how we solve them, how we fix them, is equally important to the whole audience.
Yeah, Reverend Joe, it's Jeannie, and it's so good to see you and talk to you.
Hey, wonder, great to see you always.
As somebody who worked for George W. Bush, H.W. Bush, what are you looking for tonight from Mike Pence? You mentioned, and I agree with you, that he's a very strong debater. I think he's been a little underrated going into this. But what do you think he has to do tonight on behalf of the administration, who polls are showing are really suffering after what happened last week at the debate and then going into the president's diagnosis?
Well, he's got to do things to shore up the base and to excite the base, and he's got to talk in a way that is energizing to suburban women. One of the big fights, of course, in this campaign is for the hearts and minds and the votes of suburban women and college-educated women. And so he'll have to keep that in mind in all of his talking. He'll remind voters that even if they haven't been thrilled with the tweets and some of the behavior of the president, that at the end of the day, they like the economy. They like what he does from the standpoint of lowering taxes and lowering regulation. And he'll probably also talk about how the president has made good in his promises, and that at the end of the day, what really matters are results. And so expect him to give a very level-headed and strong debate performance, just highlighting the strengths, financially certainly, of the Trump administration.
Hey, Joe, this is Rick Davis. How you doing?
Hey, Rick.
Listen, I want to change the subject a little bit to Pennsylvania, something you know quite a bit about. And it's a key battleground state, one that Trump did well in last time. But we've got new polling data since the last debate and even since the coronavirus hit the president that that the polls are starting to divide there, and a significant advantage is starting to build in some of the public surveys for Joe Biden. Are you seeing that on the ground? And you talked a little bit about how Kamala Harris has to build a little enthusiasm out of tonight. Are you seeing voters energized for this ticket?
I'm beginning to see it. I'm beginning to see some voter enthusiasm, especially among African Americans. I pastor a church, and I do talk to other churches and their pastors. And certainly among a lot of congregations of color, there's a lot of enthusiasm for Kamala Harris's candidacy and for the fact that Joe Biden put her on the ticket. And I think certainly for a lot of suburban women and college-educated women, they're, I think, heartened and pleased to see a woman on the ticket with Joe Biden. What will really matter is what they say and how they say it, for both of them. What they say and how they say it, and their capacity to win back whatever they may have lost or what may still be out there for grabs. Again, Mike Pence has to win back some of the suburban women with his talk about the need for security and law and order, and do it in a way that doesn't turn them off. So he's got to work hard to win some of those voters who voted for him, who broke for Donald Trump in the last campaign. He's got to do that to win them back. That's going to be a tall order, because Kamala Harris is going to remind voters that there have been too many police incidents, and that law and order gone amok leads to the killings of people like George Floyd. So he's going to have to walk a bit of a tightrope to try to win those voters back. But that'll be his task, and I think he'll be up to the challenge.
Well, I want to ask exactly that question, Joe, because whatever one thinks of Mike Pence, you might love him. Are we asking too much of him to really turn around a campaign that seems to be going south right now, according to the polling? Because after all, it's the president people vote for, not the vice president historically. Can the vice presidential candidate really turn that around?
Historically, that hasn't happened. So that's a great question, David, because there have been some vice presidential debates in the past that have seemed like a major victory for one side or the other, but they haven't impacted the actual general election, because at the end of the day, people vote for the candidate running for president. And they may like or not be excited about the person running as the running mate, but they really do care about the person at the top of the ticket, the person who's running for the presidency of the United States. And so Mike Pence is a very solid guy. I've known him for a long time, because I used to live in Indiana, and I was an assistant to U.S. Senator Dan Quayle in Indiana long before Mike even became a member of Congress there. So I've known him for quite some time. He's very solid, very smart, and certainly very much in control of himself in these kinds of settings. So I don't look to see him make any mistakes tonight. But it's a tall order for him to win back some of the people who've been lost by this campaign. But I think he'll make the best of it in his efforts tonight.
Okay, thank you so very much. As I say, it's always a pleasure to have you with us. That's Joe Watkins. He is former White House aide to President George Herbert Walker Bush. For more on the importance of tonight's vice presidential debate, welcome now Lara Brown. She's associate professor at George Washington University and author of Amateur Hour, Presidential Character and the Question of Leadership. So, Professor, thank you so much for being with us. Put this in an historical context with respect to vice presidential debates. As we were just talking about with Joe, historically, they have not been the main item on the ticket.
Well, that's right. I mean, there is a lot of political science data which show that voters really care about the top of the ticket. But I think tonight we are in a unique circumstance. We do have the two oldest nominees that have ever run for the office at the top of each ticket. And obviously, we are living with a coronavirus pandemic that is upsetting a kind of a normal order of things. And I think what you'll see is that the very first task that both of these individuals have to do tonight is to reassure Americans that they can step into the presidency should they be needed to do so. That's their very first task.
Okay, so this may seem unfair, but let me ask you, Lara. Is their task a little easier given what we saw last week with the two presidential candidates? Because there are a lot of Americans who didn't particularly enjoy, I think it's fair to say, what they saw on either side. I mean, if they get up there and just obey the rules and have some clear statements of policy, do both of them win?
Well, yes. I mean, I will say that what we have tonight are two professional politicians. They are people who have run for many offices. They've held many offices. They know what it means to step into a role and meet those public expectations about how they are supposed to comport themselves.
Dr. Brown, it's so good to talk to you. It's Jeannie Zaino. And I'm just wondering, as we're seeing these polls come out in the last week since the last debate, which was just mentioned, and into the president's diagnosis, and the polls are, really looking really difficult for the Republicans. Have you ever seen anything like this less than 4 weeks out of an election? And what does that suggest to you in terms of the issue of early voting, and whether, in fact, with all these sort of fast-moving events, early voting, how it plays into our system today?
Well, I think what we are seeing is that when you look at the polling and you look at some of the collapsing occurring, what it reminds me of in some ways is actually 2008. But we had a very different situation in 2008. But certainly you remember when the economy fell apart, President George W. Bush's approval rating basically dropped through the floor. And with that, he pulled down the approval rating and the likelihood of people voting for John McCain as the next president. And that partly boosted the candidate, then Senator Barack Obama, to really a much larger win than people had been anticipating earlier in the summer.
Hi, Laura. This is Rick Davis. You had to bring up that disastrous 2008 campaign of John McCain's. Thank you very much. Switching back to this election, I wanted to quiz you about the leadership issues that you've written so much about and are expert on. One thing we have in front of us tonight is the vice president, who has served as the head of the White House coronavirus task force, and probably no one issue that's more in full display right now in this election, and the one real leadership job that he's had. How would you critique his role in that, and whether that's going to play much of a role tonight?
Well, I imagine that it will play a very large role tonight. The coronavirus pandemic is what is on everyone's mind. The president having a positive COVID infection means that people are thinking about it even more. I will say that the way my book talks about leadership is, in fact, discussing that there are different kind of dimensions of leadership. And one, when they are leading, they are essentially revealing their character, because character is revealed through actions and decisions. And what is so fascinating is that when you look at kind of different leadership dimensions, people tend to lead either with a sense of empathy or compassion. They can also lead with a sense of curiosity, and humility, acknowledging experts, bringing in commissions. And then they can also lead with sort of the traditional stereotype of leadership, right? This strength and risk-taking courage. Well, the truth of the matter is a good president has the ability to lead in every dimension. And that is part of President Trump's problem. He really only knows how to lead with a sense of strength. And were he to find more humility or more curiosity, he might have actually endured this crisis much better.
For Bloomberg Television and Radio, we are waiting for this one and only vice presidential debate, which will start just about 3 minutes after the hour. And for those of you on radio, to give you a sense of what we're seeing some of, they're gathering in the hall. There are various preliminaries, but I will say one difference already from last week is everybody has a mask on, except if they go up and are actually talking into the microphone. Everybody in the audience, and it's required, actually, of all the audience. So Professor Brown, I want to come back to this question of leadership, so terribly important. It does strike me that, unlike some situations, we have two individuals in Mike Pence and in Kamala Harris who both have led substantial organizations. So they must have some track record as leaders. Kamala Harris as head of the Attorney General's office, and Mike Pence, of course, in Indiana.
That's exactly right. And I think what you can know about them and what is important as you're assessing them as potential either vice presidents or one-day presidents is that how they have led, which dimension they choose to lean on, is likely going to be that dimension that they choose when they are in elective office in the White House in some capacity. So it is important to know, that Senator Kamala Harris does look for that personal side. She does tend to draw on empathy as being an important part of her leadership style. When you look at Mike Pence, I think he is much more akin to President Trump in wanting to have this sense of leading from strength. But I will also say Mike Pence has another dimension that he does lead from, and he tends to bring in more of that curiosity. He does ask more questions. He does at least effectuate a sense of humility at times when he has been faced with new challenges. So I do think we have some very adept politicians on the stage. I imagine we will see different aspects of their leadership. But I would also just say that from what the reporting is about this debate, I think the way to think about this debate is that it's going to be an extension of both parties' conventions. We saw the Republicans wanting to lead with a sense of fear and make the country more scared about what the possibility of a Democratic president might mean. And you saw the Democrats looking to bring empathy and create some sense of healing. So I imagine both of them will be talking to the audience tonight, but they will be talking through those narrative frames.
Again, to keep our Bloomberg television and radio audiences up to date, we're now seeing Susan Page. She's a senior editor at USA Today. She will be the moderator going through some preliminaries in the hall.
So, Professor Brown, in terms of Senator Harris being the first African-American woman and the first Asian on the stage and on a debate stage like this, are there any pitfalls there for Vice President Pence? Anything he has to watch out for in terms of his communication?
I think he has to watch being patronizing. That is certainly to turn off suburban college-educated women when there is that sense that a man is explaining something to them in, a kind of tone as though they're the father, and that they really didn't know, what they were talking about. I think that is something that kind of raises the hair on many women's necks. And so I think that's definitely something for him to watch.
Okay, thank you so very much, Professor. That's Lara Brown. She's associate professor at George Washington University. Jeannie Zaino and Rick Davis will be staying with us as we wait for this debate to start. We're looking at the debate stage. The moderator has now taken her seat, and we can see the plexiglass that was requested particularly by Kamala Harris, the senator, to make sure they're divided, given what's gone on with COVID-19 over the last week or so. So, Rick, you said something about the 2008 election. You may not want to go back to it, but I will make one point. I believe that's the only vice presidential debate that outrated in the television ratings the presidentials that year, and that was Sarah Palin. So you know something about how to turn out a crowd, that's for sure.
Well, we certainly know how to create a little atmosphere for the public. And over 65 million people watched that debate, more than any of the presidential debates that year. And it was a good debate. I think both contestants comported themselves well. And of course, that was one of the successful vice presidential debates. There have been many others, unfortunately, that I've been involved in, like the Al Gore-Jack Kemp debate that was a disaster for the ticket. And so, it does have an impact. I mean, it sets a tone. You can't bring the whole campaign back in one debate, but you can try to get it back on track. And of course, that is going to be the job for Vice President Pence tonight, is can he get this campaign back on track?
So, Jeannie, it strikes me Rick makes a really powerful point there, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong. I think there was thought that Jack Kemp didn't do very well in that debate because he was too nice. He wasn't tough enough. And that really raises one of the specters here. Typically, the vice presidential candidates are supposed to be the pit bulls, the ones that take the other guy down.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what's so curious about tonight is, we're saying on the one hand, Kamala Harris has got to be holding the administration and President Trump to account. And on the other hand, she's got to be empathetic because he is ill. And so, trying to play both of those things at the same time is going to be challenging because, as you mentioned, we've seen debates at the vice presidential level in the past where the vice presidential candidate has been accused of not being tough enough. on the opponent at the top of the ticket. So we're going to be watching tonight how sort of Kamala Harris threads that needle. If anybody can do it, I have to say she can do it. She has shown in the past in these multi-candidate debates that she has the ability to make those points.
So, Rick, even as we've been on the air, crossing the Bloomberg here is a Fox News poll that's come out that has Vice President Biden, former Vice President Biden, leading President Trump 53% to 43% nationally. I will say quickly, though, there's one other factor that you might react to, which is, according to Fox News, more voters think neighbors are backing Trump over Biden. This is something we also saw earlier in a Pennsylvania poll, I remember, where people said, I'm going to support Vice President Biden, but I think other people around me maybe are going for Trump and not telling anybody.
Well, look, I mean, the polls are the polls, and I would say there has been a big and significant change in all the national polls since the last debate, and that is a gap is opening up between Biden and Trump, and it's helping Biden. I would say it'll be interesting to see how this plays out tonight. Will Mike Pence realize that the jig is up, it's going to be hard to win, and is he going to start talking like a candidate for 2024 or as vice president on the ticket now?
Boy, Jeannie, that would be a big switch for Mike Pence, because you'd have to say whatever you say about his performance as vice president, he has been so loyal to President Trump. Almost every sentence that comes out of his mouth starts with what the president says the president did.
Absolutely. He has been the #1 defender. I think of him as sort of the ability to translate what President Trump is doing and make it palatable to sort of independent, moderate voters. And I would say we do hear that about that spiral of silence. We hear about it on the right. People saying they're not talking to pollsters or they're not telling them the truth. We don't know the veracity of that, but of course, we have to be careful. The polls were very accurate in 2016, and yet President Trump still won because we elect by electoral college, not popular vote. So, this thing is not over yet, even though the polls show Biden ahead in some cases by double digits.
Rick, I've heard this repeatedly, that actually the polls were basically right. Is it because we in the media didn't understand margin of error? What went wrong there?
Look, the media loves to track polls. The horse race is great theater, and the polls are pretty accurate by and large. Most people don't understand that there's a margin of error in most of these by 7%. So if you're 8% up, you may actually be up by 1. And so what is distinctly different now than throughout this entire campaign, where the polls have been very stable and a relatively close election, is that now these margins are getting into double digits. And when they get into double digits like this, whether they're in Pennsylvania or nationally, you're going to start seeing people side with the winner. And you haven't seen that kind of momentum so far in this campaign, but you can sense it's happening now.
Do you have the same sense, Jeannie? I mean, you really are. We're a pollster at one point yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think the polls are and were accurate. Really hard to poll, as Rick mentioned, in a really close election. You do have a margin of error. That said, I do think this is going in the wrong direction, clearly, for the president. And the concern now for Republicans is not just the presidency, it's the Senate as well. And I think in the remarks Mitch McConnell has been making, you could hear that real concern that if Biden gets out his vote, that they could potentially lose the Senate, which last year was sort of unfathomable because the map really did support the Republicans. But this thing has turned around quickly, and now you have people like Susan Collins in Maine and others who are very, very vulnerable at this point, and it's not going to take many for Democrats to take that Senate.
Yeah, fascinating. So we're just now moments away, I should say, from the beginning of this debate. Rick and Jeannie are going to be staying with us. They'll be back following the debate. And we are looking now at the hall in Salt Lake City. As I say, we have Susan Page, senior editor with USA Today, very accomplished on television. She is the moderator. She has now taken her seat on this debate stage. We have a blue stage with some red and some blue and some gold as well, as you can see. And then there is plexiglass separating the two podiums for the two candidates we'll come out to. As I say, there's going to be 9 different subjects, 10 minutes for each one, covering 90 minutes is what's expected. And we are now just seconds away from Susan Page. Here she is.
Good evening. From the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, welcome to the first and only vice presidential debate of 2020, sponsored by the Nonpartisan Commission on Presidential Debates. I'm Susan Page of USA Today. It is my honor to moderate this debate, an important part of our democracy. In Kingsbury Hall tonight, we have a small and socially distant audience, and we've taken extra precautions during this pandemic. Among other things, everyone in the audience is required to wear a face mask, and the candidates will be seated 12 feet apart. The audience is enthusiastic about their candidates, but they've agreed to express that enthusiasm only twice, at the end of the debate and now when I introduce the candidates. Please welcome California Senator Kamala Harris and Vice President Mike Pence.
Thank you.
Senator Harris and Vice President Pence, thank you for being here. We're meeting as President Trump and the First Lady continue to undergo treatment in Washington after testing positive for COVID-19. We send our thoughts and prayers to them for their rapid and complete recovery and for the recovery of everyone afflicted by the coronavirus. The two campaigns and the Commission on Presidential Debates have agreed to the ground rules for tonight. I'm here to enforce them on behalf of the millions of Americans who are watching. One note, no one in either campaign or at the Commission or anywhere else has been told in advance what topics I'll raise or what questions I'll ask. This 90-minute debate will be divided into 9 segments of about 10 minutes each. I'll begin a segment by posing a question to each of you, sometimes the same question, sometimes a different question on the same topic. You will then have 2 minutes to answer without interruption by me or the other candidate. Then we'll take 6 minutes or so to discuss the issue. At that point, although there will always be more to say, we'll move on to the next topic. We want a debate that is lively, but Americans also deserve a discussion that is civil. These are tumultuous times, but we can and will have a respectful exchange about the big issues facing our nation. Let's begin with the ongoing pandemic that has cost our country so much. Senator Harris, the coronavirus is not under control. Over the past week, Johns Hopkins reports that 39 states have had more COVID cases over the past 7 days than in the week before. 9 states have set new records. Even if a vaccine is released soon, the next administration will face hard choices. What would a Biden administration do in January and February that a Trump administration wouldn't do? Would you impose new lockdowns for businesses and schools and hotspots? A federal mandate to wear masks? You have 2 minutes to respond without interruption.
Thank you, Susan. Well, the American people have witnessed what is the greatest failure of any presidential administration in the history of our country. And here are the facts. 210,000 dead people in our country in just the last several months. Over 7 million people who have contracted this disease. 1 in 5 businesses closed. We're looking at frontline workers who have been treated like sacrificial workers. We are looking at over 30 million people who in the last several months had to file for unemployment. And here's the thing. On January 28th, the Vice President and the President were informed about the nature of this pandemic. They were informed that it's lethal in consequence, that it is airborne, that it will affect young people, and that it would be contracted because it is airborne. And they knew what was happening, and they didn't tell you. Can you imagine if you knew on January 28th, as opposed to March 13th, what they knew, what you might have done to prepare? They knew and they covered it up. The president said it was a hoax. They minimized the seriousness of it. The president said, you're on one side of his ledger if you wear a mask, you're on the other side of his ledger if you don't. And in spite of all of that, today they still don't have a plan. They still don't have a plan. Well, Joe Biden does. And our plan is about what we need to do around a national strategy for contact tracing, for testing, for administration of the vaccine, and making sure that it will be free for all. That is the plan that Joe Biden has and that I have, knowing that we have to get a hold of what has been going on, and we need to save our country, And Joe Biden is the best leader to do that. And frankly, this administration has forfeited their right to re-election based on this.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, more than 210,000 Americans have died of COVID-19 since February. The U.S. death toll as a percentage of our population is higher than that of almost every other wealthy nation on earth. For instance, our death rate is 2.5 times that of Canada next door. You head the administration's coronavirus task force. Why is the U.S. death toll as a percentage of our population higher than that of almost every other wealthy country? And you have 2 minutes to respond without interruption.
Susan, thank you. And I want to thank the Commission and the University of Utah for hosting this event. And Senator Harris, it's a privilege to be on the stage with you. And our nation has gone through a very challenging time this year. But I want the American people to know that from the very first day, President Donald Trump has put the health of America first. Before there were more than 5 cases in the United States, all people who had returned from China, President Donald Trump did what no other American president had ever done. And that was he suspended all travel from China, the second largest economy in the world. Now, Senator Joe Biden opposed that decision. He said it was xenophobic and hysterical. But I can tell you, having led the White House Coronavirus Task Force, that that decision alone by President Trump bought us invaluable time to stand up the greatest national mobilization since World War II. And I believe it saved hundreds of thousands of American lives. Because with that time, we were able to reinvent testing. More than 115 million tests have been done to date. We were able to see to the delivery of billions of supplies so our doctors and nurses had the resources support they needed. And we began, really, before the month of February was out, to develop a vaccine and to develop medicines and therapeutics that have been saving lives all along the way. And under President Trump's leadership, Operation Warp Speed, we believe we'll have literally tens of millions of doses of a vaccine before the end of this year. The reality is, when you look at the Biden plan, it reads an awful lot like what President Trump and I and our task force have been doing every step of the way. I mean, quite frankly, when I look at their plan that talks about advancing testing, creating new PPE, developing a vaccine, it looks a little bit like plagiarism, which is something Joe Biden knows a little bit about. And I think the American people know that this is a president who has put the health of America first, and the American people, I believe with my heart, can be proud of the sacrifices they have made. It's saved countless American lives.
Senator Harris, would you like to respond?
Absolutely. Whatever the vice president is claiming the administration has done, clearly it hasn't worked. When you're looking at over 210,000 dead bodies in our country, American lives that have been lost, families that are grieving that loss. And you know, the vice president is the head of the task force and knew on January 28th how serious this was. And then thanks to Bob Woodward, we learned that they knew about it. And then when that was exposed, the vice president said, when asked, well, why didn't y'all tell anybody? He said, because the president wanted people to remain calm.
Well, let's get
no, but Susan, this is important.
Susan,
I want to add, Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking.
I have to
I'm
weigh
speaking.
in.
Yeah, you can have 15 more seconds, and then we'll give the vice president a chance to respond.
So I want to ask the American people, how calm were you when you were panicked about where you're going to get your next roll of toilet paper? How calm were you when your kids were sent home from school and you didn't know when they could go back? How calm were you when your children couldn't see your parents because you were afraid they could kill them?
Let's give Vice President Pence a chance to respond. Vice President Pence, you have 1 minute to respond.
You know, there's not a day gone by that I haven't thought of every American family that's lost a loved one. And I want all of you to know that you'll always be in our hearts and in our prayers. But when you say what the American people have done over these last 8 months hasn't worked, that's a great disservice to the sacrifices the American people have made. The reality, if I may finish, Senator, the reality is Dr. Fauci said everything that he told the president in the Oval Office, the president told the American people. Now, President Trump, I will tell you, has boundless confidence in the American people, and he always spoke with confidence that we'd get through this together. But when you say it hasn't worked, when Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx and our medical experts came to us in the second week of March, they said if the president didn't take the unprecedented step of shutting down roughly half of the American economy, that we could lose 2.2 million Americans. Now, that's the reality.
Thank you.
They also
Thank you,
said
Vice
to us, if we
President
did
Pence.
everything right, Susan, we could still lose more than 200,000 Americans.
Vice President
Now, one
Pence.
life lost is
Thank
too
you.
many, Susan. But the American people, I believe, deserve credit for the sacrifices that they have made, putting the health of their family and their neighbors first, our doctors, our nurses, our first
Thank you,
responders.
Vice President Pence.
And I'm going to speak up on behalf of what the American people have done.
Vice President Pence, you were in the front row in a Rose Garden event 11 days ago at what seems to have been a super spreader event for senior administration and congressional officials. No social distancing, few masks, and now a cluster of coronavirus cases among those who were there. How can you expect Americans to follow the administration's safety guidelines to protect themselves from COVID when you at the White House have not been doing so?
Well, the American people have demonstrated over the last 8 months that when given the facts, they're willing to put the health of their families and their neighbors and people they don't even know first. President Trump and I have great confidence in the American people and their ability to take that information and put it into practice. In the height of the epidemic, when we were losing a heartbreaking number of 2,500 Americans a day, we surged resources to New Jersey and New York and New Orleans and Detroit. We told the American people what needed to be done, and the American people made the sacrifices. When the outbreak in the Sun Belt happened this summer, again, Americans stepped forward. But the reality is the work of the President of the United States goes on. A vacancy on the Supreme Court of the United States has come upon us, and the President introduced Judge Amy Coney Barrett.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice President
At
Pence.
that, if I may say, that Rose Garden event, there's been a great deal of speculation about it. My wife Karen and I were there and honored to be there. Many of the people who were at that event, Susan, actually were tested for coronavirus, and it was an outdoor event, which all of our scientists regularly and routinely advise. The difference here is President Trump and I trust the American people to make choices in the best interest of their health. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris consistently talk about mandates, and not just mandates with the coronavirus, but a government takeover of health care,
Thank you,
the Green
Vice
New
President
Deal, all government control. We're about freedom and respecting the freedom of the American people.
Let's talk about respecting the American people. You respect the American people when you tell them the truth. You respect the American people when you have the courage
Which we've
to be a
always
leader,
done.
speaking of those things that you may not want people to hear, but they need to hear so they can protect themselves. But this administration stood on information that if you had as a parent, if you had as a worker, knowing you didn't have enough money saved up, and now you're standing in a food line because of the ineptitude of an administration that was unwilling to speak the truth to the American people. So let's talk about caring about the American people. The American people have had to sacrifice far too much because of the incompetence of this administration. It is asking too much of the people.
Susan, we talked about
It is asking too much of the people. That they would not be equipped with the information they need to help themselves to protect
Susan,
their parents and their
I'm
children.
sorry. Kamala Harris, Senator Harris, I'm sorry.
It's fine, I'm Kamala.
No, you're Senator Harris to me. For life to get back to normal, Dr. Anthony Fauci and other experts say that most of the people who can be vaccinated need to be vaccinated. But half of Americans now say they wouldn't take a vaccine if it was released now. If the Trump administration approves a vaccine before or after the election, should Americans take it, and would you take it?
If the public health professionals, if Dr. Fauci, if the doctors tell us that we should take it, I'll be the first in line to take it, absolutely. But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
Vice President Pence, there have been a lot of repercussions from this pandemic. In recent days, the president's diagnosis of COVID-19 has underscored the importance of the job that you hold and that you are seeking. That's our second topic tonight. It's the role of the vice president. One of you will make history on January 20th. You will be the vice president to the oldest president the United States has ever had. Donald Trump will be 74 years old on Inauguration Day. Joe Biden will be 78 years old. That already has raised concerns among some voters, concerns that have been sharpened by President Trump's hospitalization in recent days. Vice President Pence, have you had a conversation or reached an agreement with President Trump about safeguards or procedures when it comes to the issue of presidential disability? And if not, do you think you should? You have 2 minutes without interruption.
Well, Susan, thank you, although I would like to go back.
I think we need to move on to the issue of
Well, thank you, but I would like to go back because the reality is that we're going to have a vaccine, Senator, in record time, in unheard of time, in less than a year. We have 5 companies in phase 3 clinical trials, and we're right now producing tens of millions of doses. So the fact that you continue to undermine public confidence in a vaccine, if the vaccine emerges during the Trump administration, I think is unconscionable. And Senator, I just ask you, stop playing politics with people's lives. The reality is that we will have a vaccine, we believe, before the end of this year. And it will have the capacity to save countless American lives. And your continuous undermining of confidence in a vaccine is it's just unacceptable. And let me also say, you know, the reality is when you talk about failure in this administration, we actually do know what failure looks like in a pandemic. It was 2009. The swine flu arrived in the United States. Thankfully, it ended up not being as lethal as the coronavirus. But before the end of the year, when Joe Biden was vice president of the United States, not 7.5 million people contracted the swine flu. 60 million Americans contracted the swine flu. If the swine flu had been as lethal as the coronavirus, in 2009, when Joe Biden was vice president, we would have lost 2 million American lives. His own chief of staff, Ron Klain, would say last year that it was pure luck that they did, quote, everything possible wrong. And we learned from that. They left the strategic national stockpile empty. They left an empty and hollow plan, but we still learned from it. And I think the American people, I'm going to say again, can be proud of what we have done. And Senator, please stop undermining confidence in a vaccine.
Senator Harris, let me ask you the same question that I asked Vice President Pence, which is, have you had a conversation or reached an agreement with Vice President Biden about safeguards or procedures when it comes to the issue of presidential disability? And if not, and if you win the election next month, do you think you should? You have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
So let me tell you, first of all, the day I got the call from Joe Biden, it was actually a Zoom call, asking me to serve with him on this ticket was probably one of the most memorable days of my life. I thought about my mother, who came to the United States at the age of 19, gave birth to me at the age of 25 at Kaiser Hospital in Oakland, California. And the thought that I'd be sitting here right now, I know would make her proud, and she must be looking down on this. Joe and I were raised in a very similar way. We were raised with values that are about hard work, about the value and the dignity of public service, and about the importance of fighting for the dignity of all people. And I think Joe asked me to serve with him because, I have a career that included being elected the first woman district attorney of San Francisco, where I created models of innovation for law enforcement in terms of reform of the criminal justice system. I was elected the first woman of color and black woman to be elected Attorney General of the state of California, where I ran the second largest Department of Justice in the United States, second only to the United States Department of Justice. And there I took on everything from transnational criminal organizations to the big banks that were taking advantage of homeowners to for-profit colleges that were taking advantage of veterans. And then, of course, now I serve in the United States Senate as only the second black woman ever elected to the United States Senate. I serve on the Senate Intelligence Committee, where I've been in regular receipt of classified information about threats to our nation and hotspots around the world. I've traveled the world. I've met with our soldiers in war zones. And I think Joe has asked me to serve with him because he knows that we share a purpose which is about lifting up the American people. And after the 4 years that we have seen of Donald Trump unifying our country around our common values and principles.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Neither President Trump nor Vice President Biden has released a sort of detailed health information that had become the modern norm until the 2016 election. And in recent days, President Trump's doctors have given misleading answers or refused to answer basic questions about his health. And my question to each of you in turn is this information voters deserve to know? Vice President Pence, would you like to go first?
Well, Susan, thank you. And let me say, on behalf of the President and the First Lady, how moved we've all been by the outpouring of prayers and concern for the President. And I do believe it's emblematic of the prayers and the concern that have ushered forth for every American impacted by the coronavirus. But the care the President received at Walter Reed Hospital, the White House doctors, was exceptional. And the transparency that they practiced all along the way will continue. The American people have a right to know about the health and well-being of their president, and will continue to do that. But I'm just extremely grateful and was more than a little moved by the broad and bipartisan support. And Senator, I want to thank you and Joe Biden for your expressions of genuine concern. And I also want to congratulate you, as I did on that phone call, on the historic nature of your nomination.
Thank you.
I never expected to be on this stage 4 years ago, so I know the feeling. But the reality is we've got an election before the American people in the midst of this challenging year. And the stakes have never been higher, but I think the choice has never been clearer.
I want to give Senator Harris a chance to respond to the same question I asked, which is, do voters have a right to know more detailed health information about presidential candidates and especially about presidents, especially when they're facing some kind of challenge?
Absolutely, and that's why Joe Biden has been so incredibly transparent, and certainly by contrast, the president has not, both in terms of health records, but also let's look at taxes. We now know, because of great investigative journalism, that Donald Trump paid $750 in taxes. When I first heard about it, I literally said, "You mean $750,000? And it was like, no, $750. We now know Donald Trump owes and is in debt for $400 million. And just so everyone is clear, when we say in debt, it means you owe money to somebody. And it'd be really good to know who the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, owes money to, because the American people have a right to know what is influencing the President's decisions. And is he making those decisions on the best interest of the American people, of you, or self-interest? So, Susan, I'm glad you asked about transparency, because it has to be across the board. Joe has been incredibly transparent over many, many years. The one thing we all know about Joe, he puts it all out there. He is honest, he is forthright. But Donald Trump, on the other hand, has been about covering up everything.
Thank you, Senator Harris. I want to give you a chance to respond, Vice President.
Well, look, I respect the fact that Joe Biden spent 47 years in public life. I respect your public service as well.
Thank you.
But the American people have a president who's a businessman, he's a job creator, who's paid tens of millions of dollars in taxes, payroll taxes, property taxes. He's created tens of thousands of American jobs. And the president said those public reports are not accurate. And the president's also released literally stacks of financial disclosures the American people can review just as the law allows. But the distinction here is that Joe Biden, 47 years in public service, compared to President Donald Trump, who brought all of that experience 4 years ago.
Thank you, Vice
and
President.
Turned this economy around by cutting taxes, rolling back regulation, unleashing American energy, fighting for free and fair trade, and all of that's on the line if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
You know, that's a good segue into our third topic, which is about the economy. This has been another aspect of life for Americans that's been so affected by this coronavirus. We have a jobs crisis brewing. On Friday, we learned that the unemployment rate had declined to 7.9% in September, but the job growth had stalled, and that was before the latest round of layoffs and furloughs in the airline industry at Disney and elsewhere. Hundreds of thousands of discouraged workers have stopped looking for work. Nearly 11 million jobs that existed at the beginning of the year haven't been replaced. Those hardest hit include Latinos, Blacks, and women. Senator Harris, the Biden-Harris campaign has proposed new programs to boost the economy, and you would pay for that new spending by raising $4 trillion in taxes on wealthy individuals and corporations. Some economists warn that could curb entrepreneurial ventures that fuel growth and create jobs. Would raising taxes put the recovery at risk? And you have 2 minutes to answer uninterrupted.
Thank you. On the issue of the economy, I think there couldn't be a more fundamental difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Joe Biden believes you measure the health and the strength of America's economy based on the health and the strength of the American worker and the American family. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump, who measures the strength of the economy based on how rich people are doing, which is why he passed a tax bill benefiting the top 1% and the biggest corporations of America, leading to a $2 trillion deficit that the American people are going to have to pay for. On day one, Joe Biden will repeal that tax bill. He'll get rid of it. And what he'll do with the money is invest it in the American people. And through a plan that is about investing in infrastructure, something that Donald Trump said he would do. I remember hearing about some infrastructure week. I don't think it ever happened. But Joe Biden will do that. He'll invest in infrastructure. It's about upgrading our roads and bridges, but also investing in clean energy and renewable energy. Joe is going to invest that money in what we need to do around innovation. There was a time when our country believed in science and invested in research and development so that we were an innovation leader on the globe. Joe Biden will use that money to invest in education. So, for example, for folks who want to go to a 2-year community college, it will be free. If you come from a family that makes less than $125,000, you'll go to a public university for free. And across the board, we'll make sure that if you have student loan debt, it's cut by $10,000. That's how Joe Biden thinks about the economy, which is it's about investing in the people of our country as opposed to passing a tax bill, which had the benefit of letting American corporations go offshore to do their business.
Thank you,
You're
Senator
welcome.
Harris. Vice President Pence, your administration has been predicting a rapid and robust recovery, but the latest economic report suggests that's not happening. Should Americans be braced for an economic comeback that is going to take not months, but a year or more? You have 2 minutes to answer uninterrupted.
When President Trump and I took office, America had gone through the slowest economic recovery since the Great Depression. When Joe Biden was vice president, they tried to tax and spend and regulate and bail our way back to a growing economy. President Trump cut taxes across the board. Despite what Senator Harris says, the average American family of 4 had $2,000 in savings in taxes. And with the rise in wages that occurred, most predominantly for blue-collar, hardworking Americans, the average household income for a family of 4 increased by $4,000 following President Trump's tax cuts. But America, you just heard Senator Harris tell you, on day one, Joe Biden's going to raise your taxes. It's really remarkable to think, Susan.
That's not what I said.
I mean, right after a time where we're going through a pandemic that lost 22 million jobs at the height, we've already added back 11.6 million jobs because we had a president who cut taxes, rolled back regulation, unleashed American energy, fought for free and fair trade, and secured $4 trillion from the Congress of the United States to give direct payments to families, save 50 million jobs through the Paycheck Protection Program. We literally have spared no expense to help the American people and the American worker through this. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris want to raise taxes. They want to bury our economy under a $2 trillion Green New Deal, which you were one of the original co-sponsors of in the United States Senate. They want to abolish fossil fuels and ban fracking, which would cost hundreds of thousands of American jobs all across the heartland. And Joe Biden wants to go back to the economic surrender to China, that when we took office, half of our international trade deficit was with China alone. And Joe Biden wants to repeal all of the tariffs that President Trump put into effect to fight for American jobs and American workers. Joe Biden says democracy's on the ballot. Make no mistake about it, Susan. The American economy, the American comeback is on the ballot with 4 more years of growth and opportunity, 4 more years of President Donald Trump. 2021 is going to be the biggest economic year in the history of this country.
Thank you, Vice President Pence. Senator Harris.
Well, I mean, I thought we saw enough of it in last week's debate, but I think this is supposed to be a debate based on fact and truth. And the truth and the fact is Joe Biden has been very clear. He will not raise taxes on anybody who makes less than $400,000
He said he's
a
going to
year.
repeal the Trump tax cuts.
Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking.
Well, wait,
I'm speaking.
it'd be important if you said the truth. Joe Biden said twice in the debate last week that he's going to repeal the Trump tax cuts. That was tax cuts that gave the average working family $2,000 in a tax break every single year. Senator,
that is
that's the math.
absolutely not true. That
Is he only going to repeal part of the Trump tax cuts?
If you don't mind letting me finish, we can then have a conversation, okay?
Please.
Okay. Joe Biden will not raise taxes on anyone who makes less than $400,000 a year. He has been very clear about that. Joe Biden will not end fracking. He has been very clear about that. Joe Biden is the one who, during the Great Recession, was responsible for the Recovery Act that brought America back. And now the Trump-Pence administration wants to take credit when they rode the coattails of Joe Biden's success for the economy that they had at the beginning of their term. Of course, now the economy is a complete disaster. But Joe Biden, on the one hand, did that. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump, who has reigned over a recession that is being compared to the Great Depression. On the one hand, you have Joe Biden, who was responsible with President Barack Obama for the Affordable Care Act, which brought health care to over 20 million Americans and protected people with pre-existing conditions. And what it also did is it saved those families who otherwise were going bankrupt because of hospital bills they could not afford. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump, who's in court right now, trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, which means that you will lose protections if you have pre-existing conditions. And this is very important, Susan.
Yes,
and it's important.
We need to give Vice President.
I'd just like to, he interrupted me, and I'd like to just finish, please. If you have a pre-existing condition, heart disease, diabetes, breast cancer, they're coming for you. If you love someone who has a pre-existing condition, they're coming for you. If you are under the age of 26 on your parents' coverage, they're coming for you.
Senator Harris, thank you.
You're welcome.
Let me give you a chance to respond.
Well, I hope we have a chance to talk about health care because Obamacare was a disaster. The American people remember it well. And President Trump and I have a plan to improve health care and to protect pre-existing conditions for every American. But look, Senator Harris, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. You yourself said on multiple occasions when you were running for president that you would ban fracking. Joe Biden looked at a supporter in the eye and pointed and said, I guarantee that we will abolish fossil fuels. They have a $2 trillion version of the Green New Deal, Susan, that your newspaper, USA Today, said really wasn't that very different from the original Green New Deal. More taxes, more regulation, banning fracking, abolishing fossil fuel, crushing American energy, and economic surrender to China is a prescription for economic decline. President Trump and I will keep America growing. The V-shaped recovery that's underway right now will continue with 4 more years of President Donald Trump.
Thank you very, very much, Vice President Pence. Once again, you've provided the perfect segue to a new topic, which is climate change. And Vice President Pence, I'd like to pose the first question to you. This year, we've seen record-setting hurricanes in the South. Another one, Hurricane Delta, is now threatening the Gulf. And we have seen record-setting wildfires in the West. Do you believe, as the scientific community has concluded, that man-made climate change has made wildfires bigger, hotter, and more deadly, and have made hurricanes wetter, slower, and more damaging? You have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Thank you, Susan. Well, first, I'm very proud of our record on the environment and on conservation. According to all of the best estimates, our air and land are cleaner than any time ever recorded. And our water is among the cleanest in the world. And just a little while ago, the president signed the Outdoors Act. It's the largest investment in our public lands and public parks in 100 years. So President Trump has made a commitment to conservation and to the environment. Now, with regard to climate change, the climate is changing. But the issue is, what's the cause and what do we do about it? And President Trump has made it clear that we're going to continue to listen to the science. Now, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris would put us back in the Paris Climate Accord. They'd impose the Green New Deal. which would crush American energy, would increase the energy costs of American families in their homes, and literally would crush American jobs. And President Trump and I believe that the progress that we have made in a cleaner environment has been happening precisely because we have a strong free market economy. You know, what's remarkable is the United States has reduced CO2 more than the countries that are still in the Paris Climate Accord, but we've done it through innovation, and we've done it through natural gas and fracking, which, Senator, the American people can go look at the record. I know Joe Biden says otherwise now, as you do, but the both of you repeatedly committed to abolishing fossil fuel and banning fracking. And so by creating the kind of American innovation, we're actually steering toward a stronger and better environment. With regard to wildfires, President Trump and I believe that forest management has to be front and center, and even Governor Gavin Newsom from your state has agreed we've got to work on forest management. And with regard to hurricanes, the National Oceanic Administration tells us that actually as difficult as they are,
Thank you, Vice President.
There are no more hurricanes today than there were 100 years ago.
Thank you.
But many of the climate alarmists use hurricanes and wildfires to try and sell their bill of goods of a Green New Deal. And President Trump and I are going to always put American jobs and American workers first.
Senator Harris, as the Vice President mentioned, you co-sponsored the Green New Deal in Congress. But Vice President Biden said in last week's debate that he does not support the Green New Deal. But if you look at the Biden-Harris campaign website, it describes the Green New Deal as a crucial framework. What exactly would be the stance of a Biden-Harris administration toward the Green New Deal? You have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Sure. So first of all, I will repeat, and the American people know, that Joe Biden will not ban fracking. That is a fact. That is a fact. I will repeat that Joe Biden has been very clear that he thinks about growing jobs, which is why he will not increase taxes for anyone who makes less than $400,000 a year. Joe Biden's economic plan, Moody's, which is a reputable Wall Street firm, has said will create 7 million more jobs than Donald Trump's. And part of those jobs that will be created by Joe Biden are going to be about clean energy and renewable energy. Because you see, Joe understands that the west coast of our country is burning, including my home state of California. Joe sees what is happening on the Gulf states, which are being battered by storms. Joe has seen and talked with the farmers in Iowa, whose entire crops have been destroyed because of floods. And so Joe believes, again, in science. I'll tell you something, Susan. I served, when I first got to the Senate, on the committee that's responsible for the environment. Do you know this administration took the word science off the website and then took the phrase climate change off the website? We have seen a pattern with this administration, which is they don't believe in science. And Joe's plan is about saying we're going to deal with it, but we're also going to create jobs. Donald Trump, when asked about the wildfires in California, and the question was, you know, the science is telling us this, you know what Donald Trump said? Science doesn't know. So let's talk about who is prepared to lead our country over the course of the next 4 years on what is an existential threat to us as human beings. Joe is about saying we're going to invest that in renewable energy. It's going to be about the creation of millions of jobs. We will achieve net zero emissions by 2050, carbon neutral by 2035. Joe has a plan. This has been a lot of talk from the Trump administration, and really it has been to go backward instead of forward. We will also re-enter the climate agreement with pride.
Senator Harris just said that climate change is an existential threat. Vice President Pence, do you believe that climate change poses an existential threat?
As I said, Susan, the climate is changing. We'll follow the science. But once again, Senator Harris is denying the fact that they're going to raise taxes on every American. Joe Biden said twice in the debate last week that on day one he was going to repeal the Trump tax cuts. Those tax cuts delivered $2,000 in tax relief to the average family of four across America. And with regard to banning fracking, I just recommend that people Look at the record. You yourself said repeatedly that you would ban fracking. You were the first Senate co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. And while Joe Biden denied the Green New Deal, Susan, thank you for pointing out, the Green New Deal is on their campaign website. And as USA Today said, it's essentially the same plan as you co-sponsored with AOC when she submitted it in the Senate. And you just heard the senator say that she's going to resubmit America to the Paris Climate Accord. Look, the American people have always cherished our environment. We'll continue to cherish it. We've made great progress reducing CO2 emissions through American innovation and the development of natural gas through fracking. We don't need a massive $2 trillion Green New Deal that would impose all new mandates on American businesses and American families.
Thank you.
Joe Biden wants us to retrofit 4 million American business buildings. It makes no sense. It will cost jobs. President Trump is going to put America first. He's going to put jobs first, and we're going to take care of our environment and follow the science.
Thank you, on the issue of jobs,
Senator Harris.
Let's talk about that. The vice president earlier referred to, as part of what he thinks is an accomplishment, the president's trade war with China. You lost that trade war. You lost it. What ended up happening is because of a so-called trade war with China, America lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs. Farmers have experienced bankruptcy because of it. We are in a manufacturing recession because of it. And when we look at where this administration has been, there are estimates that by the end of the term of this administration, they will have lost more jobs than almost any other presidential administration. And the American people know what I'm talking about. You know, I think about 20-year-olds. You know, we have a 20-year-old, a 20-something-year-old, who are coming out of high school and college right now, and you're wondering, is there going to be a job there for me? We're looking at people who are trying to figure out how they're going to pay rent by the end of the month. Almost half of American renters are worried about whether they're going to be able to pay rent by the end of the month. This is where the economy is in America right now, and it is because of the catastrophe and the failure of leadership of this administration.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, let me give you just 15 seconds to respond, because then I want to move on to
Well, I'd love to respond. Look, lost the trade war with China. Joe Biden never fought it. Joe Biden has been a cheerleader for communist China over the last several decades. And again, Senator Harris, you're entitled to your opinion. You're not entitled to your own facts. When Joe Biden was vice president, we lost 200,000 manufacturing jobs, and President Obama said they were never coming back. He said we needed a magic wand to bring them back. In our first 3 years after we cut taxes, rolled back regulation, unleashed American energy, this administration saw 500,000 manufacturing jobs created. And that's exactly the kind of growth we're going to continue to see as we bring our nation through this pandemic. But a Green New Deal, your massive new mandates, your Paris Climate Accord, it's going to kill jobs this time, just like it killed jobs.
I just need to respond very briefly.
15 seconds, and then we'll move on.
Thank you. Joe Biden is responsible for saving America's auto industry, and you voted against it. So let's set the record straight. Thank you.
Yeah. I'd like to talk about China. We have, as our next topic, we have no more complicated or consequential foreign relationship than the one with China. It is a huge market for American agricultural goods. It's a potential partner in dealing with climate change in North Korea. And in a video tonight, President Trump again blamed it for the coronavirus, saying China will pay. Vice President Pence, how would you describe our fundamental relationship with China? Competitors, adversaries, enemies? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Susan. Well, before I leave that, let me speak to voting records if I can. You know, everybody knows that NAFTA cost literally thousands of American factories to close. We saw automotive jobs go south of the border. President Trump fought to renegotiate NAFTA. And the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement is now the law of the land. American people deserve to know Senator Kamala Harris was one of only 10 members of the Senate to vote against the USMCA. It was a huge win for American auto workers. It was a huge win for American farmers, especially dairy in the upper Midwest. But Senator, you said it didn't go far enough on climate change, that you put your radical environmental agenda ahead of American auto workers and ahead of American jobs. The American people deserve to know that. It's probably why Newsweek magazine said that Kamala Harris was the most liberal member of the United States Senate in 2019, more liberal than Bernie Sanders, more liberal than any of the others in the United States Senate. So now, with regard to China, look, Susan, first and foremost, China is to blame for the coronavirus. And President Trump is not happy about it. He's made that very clear, made it clear again today. China and the World Health Organization did not play straight with the American people. They did not let our personnel into China to get information on the coronavirus until the middle of February. Fortunately, President Trump, in dealing with China from the outset of this administration, standing up to China that had been taking advantage of America for decades in the wake of Joe Biden's cheerleading for China, President Trump made that decision before the end of January to suspend all travel from China. And again, the American people deserve to know Joe Biden opposed President Trump's decision to suspend all travel from China. He said it was hysterical. He said it was xenophobic.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
But President Trump has stood up to China. We're going to continue to stand strong.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
We want to improve the relationship, but we're going to level the playing field, and we're going to hold China accountable for what they did to America with the coronavirus.
Thank you. Senator Harris, let me ask you the same question that I asked the Vice President. How would you describe our fundamental relationship with China? Are we competitors, adversaries, enemies? You'll have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Susan, the Trump administration's perspective and approach to China has resulted in the loss of American lives, American jobs, and America's standing. There's a weird obsession that President Trump has had with getting rid of whatever accomplishment was achieved by President Obama and Vice President Biden. For example, they created within the White House an office that basically was responsible for monitoring pandemics. They got rid of it.
Not true.
There was a team of disease experts that President Obama and Vice President Biden dispatched to China to monitor what is now predictable and what might happen. They pulled them out. We now are looking at 210,000 Americans who have lost their lives. Let's look at the job situation. We mentioned before the trade deal, the trade war, they wanted to call it, with China. It resulted in the loss of over 300 manufacturing jobs and a manufacturing recession, and the American consumer paying thousands of dollars more for goods because of that failed war that they called it. Then let's talk about standing. Pew, a reputable research firm, has done an analysis that shows that leaders of all of our formerly allied countries have now decided that they hold in greater esteem and respect Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, than they do Donald Trump, the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States. This is where we are today because of a failure of leadership by this administration.
Senator Harris, we've seen changes in the role of the United States in terms of global leadership over the past 4 years. And of course, times do change. What's your definition? We've seen strains with China, of course, as the Vice President mentioned. We've seen strains with our traditional allies in NATO and elsewhere. What is your definition of the role of American leadership in 2020?
So, you know, I love talking with Joe about a lot of these issues. And, you know, Joe, I think he said it quite well. He says, you know, foreign policy, it might sound complicated, but really it's relationships. So just think about it as relationships. And so we know this in our personal and professional relationships. You got to keep your word to your friends. Got to be loyal to your friends. People who've stood with you, got to stand with them. You got to know who your adversaries are and keep them in check. But what we have seen with Donald Trump is that he has betrayed our friends and embraced dictators around the world. Let's take, for example, Russia. So Russia, I serve on the Intelligence Committee of the United States Senate. America's intelligence community told us Russia interfered in the election of the President of the United States in 2016 and is playing in 2020. Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, said the same. But Donald Trump, the commander-in-chief of the United States of America, prefers to take the word of Vladimir Putin over the word of the American intelligence community. You look at our friends at NATO. He has walked away from agreements. You can look at the Iran nuclear deal, which now has put us in a position where we are less safe because they are building up what might end up being a significant nuclear arsenal. We were in that deal, guys. We were in the Iran nuclear deal with friends, with allies around the country. And because of Donald Trump's unilateral approach to foreign policy, coupled with his isolationism, he pulled us out and has made America less safe. So, Susan, it's about relationships. And the thing that has always been part of the strength of our nation, in addition to our great military, has been that we keep our word. But Donald Trump doesn't understand that because he doesn't understand what it means to be honest.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, let me give you a chance to respond.
Well, thank you. Well, President Trump kept his word when we moved the American embassy to Jerusalem, the capital of the state of Israel. When Joe Biden was vice president, they promised to do that, and they never did. We've stood strong with our allies, but we've been demanding. NATO is now contributing more to our common defense than ever before, thanks to President Trump's leadership. We've strengthened our alliances across the Asia-Pacific, and we've stood strong against those who would do us harm. You know, when President Trump came into office, ISIS had captured an area of the Middle East the size of Pennsylvania. But President Trump unleashed the American military, and our armed forces destroyed the ISIS caliphate and took down their leader, al-Baghdadi, without one American casualty. Al-Baghdadi was responsible for the death of thousands. But notably, America's hearts today are with the family of Kayla Mueller, her parents of which are here with us tonight in Salt Lake City. Today, two of the ISIS killers responsible for Kayla Mueller's murder were brought to justice in the United States. Jihadi John was killed on the battlefield along with the other beetle. The reality is that when Joe Biden was vice president, we had an opportunity to save Kayla Mueller. It breaks my heart to reflect on it, but the military came into the Oval Office, presented a plan. They said they knew where Kayla was. Baghdadi had held her for 18 months, abused her mercilessly before they killed her. But when Joe Biden was vice president, they hesitated for a month. And when armed forces finally went in, it was clear she'd been moved 2 days earlier. And her family says with a heart that broke the heart of every American that if President Donald Trump had been president, they believe Kayla would be alive today.
Thank you, Vice President.
We destroyed the ISIS caliphate. And you talk about re-entering the Iran nuclear deal. I mean, the last administration transferred $1.8 billion to the leading state sponsor of terrorism. President Donald Trump got us out of the deal.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
And when Qasem Soleimani was traveling to Baghdad to do harm to Americans, President Donald Trump took him out.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
And America is safer, our allies are safer, and the American people know President Donald Trump will never
Thank you, Vice President
take
Pence.
action.
I would like to give Senator Harris a chance to respond, but not at such great length because, of course, there are other topics we want to talk about.
But I would like equal time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
First of all, to the Mueller family, I know about your daughter's case, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. What happened to her is awful, and it should have never happened. And I know Joe feels the same way. And I know that President Obama feels the same way. But you mentioned Soleimani. Let's start there. So after the strike on Soleimani, there was a counter strike on our troops in Iraq. And they suffered serious brain injuries. And do you know what Donald Trump dismissed them as? Headaches. And this is about a pattern of Donald Trump's, where he has referred to our men who are serving in our military as suckers and losers. Donald Trump, who went to Arlington Cemetery and stood above the graves of our fallen heroes and said, what's in it for them? Because, of course, he only thinks about what's in it for him. Let's take what he said about John McCain, a great American hero. And Donald Trump says he doesn't deserve to be called a hero because he was a prisoner of war. And this is very important when you want to talk about who is the current commander-in-chief and what they care about and what they don't care about. Public reporting that Russia had bounties on the heads of American soldiers. And you know what a bounty is? It's somebody puts a price on your head and they will pay it if you are killed. And Donald Trump had talked at least 6 times to Vladimir Putin and never brought up the subject. Joe Biden would never do that.
Thank you.
Joe Biden would, but Joe Biden would hold Russia to account for any threat to our nation's security or to our troops who are sacrificing their lives for the sake of our democracy and our safety.
Thank you, Senator Harris. This is such an important issue, but we have other important issues as well. And
Susan,
I want to make sure we have a chance
I really have
to talk
to respond
about
to that. Look, she has
15 seconds because
well, I got to have
trying
more
to
than
keep,
that. Look,
well, I'm sorry, but Vice President,
look,
you've had more time than she's had so far.
The slanders against President Donald Trump regarding men and women of our armed forces are absurd.
I'm sorry, Vice
My
President
son
Pence.
is a captain in the United
Yes.
States Marine Corps. My son-in-law is deployed in the United States Navy. I can assure all of you, with sons and daughters serving in our military, President Donald Trump not only respects but reveres all of those who serve in our armed forces, and any suggestion otherwise is ridiculous.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
The American people deserve, Susan, the American people deserve to know.
Vice President Pence, I did not, excuse me,
Susan, the
I did
American
not
people
create
deserve
the
to know
rules for tonight.
Joe Biden.
Your campaigns agreed to the rules for tonight's debate with the Commission on Presidential Debates. I'm here to enforce them, which involves moving from one topic to another, giving roughly equal time to both of you, which is what I'm trying very hard to do.
Go right ahead.
So I want to go ahead and move to the next topic, which is an important one, as the last topic was, and that is the Supreme Court. On Monday, the Senate Judiciary Committee is scheduled to open hearings on Amy Coney Barrett's nomination to the Supreme Court. Senator Harris, you'll be there as a member of the committee. Yes. Her confirmation would cement the court's conservative majority and make it likely open to more abortion restrictions, even to overturning the landmark Roe v. Wade ruling. Access to abortion would then be up to the states. Vice President Pence, you're the former governor of Indiana. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, what would you want Indiana to do? Would you want your home state to ban all abortions? You have 2 minutes, uninterrupted.
Well, thank you for the question, but I'll use a little bit of my time to respond to that very important issue before. The American people deserve to know Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general, was responsible for the death of hundreds of American service members. When the opportunity came, we saw him headed to Baghdad to kill more Americans. President Trump didn't hesitate, and Qasem Soleimani is gone. But you deserve to know that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris actually criticized the decision to take out Qasem Soleimani. It's really inexplicable, but with regard to Joe Biden, it's explainable, because history records that Joe Biden actually opposed the raid against Osama bin Laden. It's absolutely essential that we have a commander-in-chief who will not hesitate to act to protect American lives and to protect American service members, and that's what you have in President Donald Trump. Now, with regard to the Supreme Court of the United States, let me say President Trump and I could not be more enthusiastic about the opportunity to see Judge Amy Coney Barrett become Justice Amy Coney Barrett. Now, she's a brilliant woman, and she will bring a lifetime of experience and a sizable American family to the Supreme Court of the United States. And our hope is, in the hearing next week, unlike Justice Kavanaugh received with treatment from you and others, we hope she gets a fair hearing. And we particularly hope that we don't see the kind of attacks on her Christian faith that we saw before. I mean, the Democrat chairman of the Judiciary Committee before, when Judge Barrett was being confirmed for the Court of Appeals, expressed concern that the dogma of her faith lived loudly in her. Dick Durbin of Illinois said that it was a concern. Senator, I know one of our judicial nominees you actually attacked because they were a member of the Catholic Knights of Columbus, just because the Knights of Columbus holds pro-life views and pro-marriage views.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
So
Your time
my hope is
up.
that when the hearing takes place,
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
that Judge Amy Coney Barrett will be respected,
Thank you,
treated
Vice President
respectfully,
Pence.
voted and confirmed
Thank
to the
you.
Supreme Court of the United States.
Senator Harris, you're the senator from and former Attorney General of California. So let me ask you a parallel question to the one I posed to the Vice President. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, what would you want California to do? Would you want your home state to enact no restrictions on access to abortion? And you have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Thank you, Susan. First of all, Joe Biden and I are both people of faith, and it's insulting to suggest that we would knock anyone for their faith. And in fact, Joe, if elected, will be only the second practicing Catholic as President of the United States. On the issue of this nomination, Joe and I are very clear, as are the majority of the American people. We are 27 days before the decision about who will be the next president of the United States. And, you know, before, when this conversation has come up, you know, it's been about election year or election time. We're literally in an election. Over 4 million people have voted. People are in the process of voting right now. And so Joe has been very clear, as the American people are. Let the American people fill that seat in the White House, and then we'll fill that seat on the United States Supreme Court. And to your point, Susan, the issues before us couldn't be more serious. There's the issue of choice, and I will always fight for a woman's right to make a decision about her own body. It should be her decision and not that of Donald Trump and the Vice President, Michael Pence. But let's also look at what else is before the court. It's the Affordable Care Act. Like, literally in the midst of a public health pandemic, when over 210,000 people have died and 7 million people probably have what will be in the future considered a pre-existing condition because you contracted the virus. Donald Trump is in court right now trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. And I said it before, and it bears repeating. This means that there will be no more protections if they win for people with pre-existing conditions. No. This means that over 20 million people will lose your coverage. It means that if you're under the age of 26, you can't stay on your parents' coverage anymore. And here's the thing. The contrast couldn't be more clear. They're trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. Joe Biden is saying, let's expand coverage. Let's give you a choice of a public option or private coverage. Let's bring down premiums.
Thank you, Senator
Let's
Harris.
lower Medicare eligibility to 60.
Thank you, Senator.
That's true
Harris.
leadership.
You know, you mentioned earlier, Vice President Pence, that the president was committed to maintaining protections for people with pre-existing conditions. But you do have this court case that you are supporting, your administration supporting, that would strike down the Affordable Care Act. The president says, President Trump says that he's going to protect people with pre-existing conditions, but he has not explained how he would do that. And that was one of the toughest nuts to crack when they were passing the Affordable Care Act. So tell us specifically, how would your administration protect Americans with pre-existing conditions to have access to affordable insurance if the Affordable Care Act is struck down?
Well, thank you, Susan. But let me just say, addressing your very first question, I couldn't be more proud to serve as vice president to a president who stands without apology for the sanctity of human life. I'm pro-life. I don't apologize for it. And this is another one of those cases where there's such a dramatic contrast. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris support taxpayer funding of abortion all the way up to the moment of birth. Late-term abortion. They want to increase funding to Planned Parenthood of America. Now, for our part, I would never presume how Judge Amy Coney Barrett would rule on the Supreme Court of the United States, but we'll continue to stand strong for the right to life. When you speak about the Supreme Court, though, I think the American people really deserve an answer, Senator Harris. Are you and Joe Biden going to pack the court if Judge Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed? I mean, there have been 29 vacancies on the Supreme Court during presidential election years, from George Washington to Barack Obama. Presidents have nominated in all 29 cases. But your party is actually openly advocating adding seats to the Supreme Court, which has had 9 seats for 150 years, if you don't get your way. This is a classic case of if you can't win by the rules, you're going to change the rules. Now, you've refused to answer the question. Joe Biden has refused to answer the question. So I think the American people would really like to know, if Judge Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed to the Supreme Court of the United States, are you and Joe Biden, if somehow you win this election, going to pack the Supreme Court to get your way?
I'm so glad we went through a little history lesson. Let's do that a little more. In 1864...
Well, I'd like you to answer the question.
No, Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking. I'm speaking. Okay. In 1864, one of the, I think, political heroes, certainly of the president, I assume of you also, Mr. Vice President, is Abraham Lincoln. Mm-hmm. Abraham Lincoln was up for re-election. And it was 27 days before the election. And a seat became open on the United States Supreme Court. Abraham Lincoln's party was in charge not only of the White House, but the Senate. But Honest Abe said it's not the right thing to do. The American people deserve to make the decision about who will be the next president of the United States. And then that person can select who will serve for a lifetime on the highest court of our land. And so Joe and I are very clear. The American people are voting right now, and it should be their decision about who will serve on this most important body for a lifetime.
Thank you, Senator Harris.
People, Susan, are voting right now. They'd like to know if you and Joe Biden are going to pack the Supreme Court if you don't get your way in this nomination.
Let's talk about packing.
You once again gave a non-answer. Joe Biden gave a non-answer.
Trying to answer you now.
The American people deserve a straight answer. And if you haven't figured it out yet, the straight answer is they are going to pack the Supreme Court if they somehow win this election. Men and women, I got to tell you, people across this country, if you cherish our Supreme Court, if you cherish the separation of powers, you need to reject the Biden-Harris ticket. Come November the 3rd, re-elect President Donald Trump, and we'll stand by that separation of powers in a 9-seat Supreme Court.
Yeah, let's talk about packing the court then. Let's talk about the fact. Yeah, I'm about to. So the Trump-Pence administration has been, because I sit on the Senate Judiciary Committee, Susan, as you mentioned, and I've witnessed the appointments for lifetime appointments to the federal courts, district courts, courts of appeal. People who are purely ideological, people who have been reviewed by legal professional organizations and found to have been not competent, are substandard. And do you know that of the 50 people who President Trump appointed to the Court of Appeals for lifetime appointments, not one is black? This is what they've been doing. You want to talk about packing a court? Let's have that discussion.
All right, thank you, Senator. Let's go on and talk about the issue of racial justice.
I just want the record to reflect she never answered the question. So I think maybe the next debate, Joe Biden will answer the question, but I think the American people know the answer.
Thank you, Vice President. In March, Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old emergency room technician in Louisville, was shot and killed after police officers executing a search warrant in a narcotics investigation broke into her apartment. The police said they identified themselves. Taylor's boyfriend said he didn't hear them do that. He used a gun registered to him to fire a shot, which wounded an officer. The officers then fired more than 20 rounds into the apartment. They say they were acting in self-defense. None of them have been indicted in connection with her death. Senator Harris, in the case of Breonna Taylor, was justice done? You have 2 minutes.
I don't believe so. And I've talked with Breonna's mother, Tamika Palmer, and her family. And her family deserves justice. She was a beautiful young woman. She had as her life goal to become a nurse, and she wanted to become an EMT to first learn what's going on out on the street so she could then become a nurse and save lives. And her life was taken unjustifiably and tragically and violently. And it brings me to, the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that America witnessed, during which an American man was tortured and killed under the knee of an armed, uniformed police officer. And people around our country of every race, of every age, of every gender, perfect strangers to each other, marched shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm, fighting for us to finally achieve that ideal of equal justice under law. And I was a part of those peaceful protests. And I believe strongly that, first of all, we are never going to condone violence, but we always must fight for the values that we hold dear, including the fight to achieve our ideals. And that's why Joe Biden and I have said on this subject, look, and I'm a former career prosecutor. I know what I'm talking about. Bad cops are bad for good cops. We need reform of our policing in America and our criminal justice system, which is why Joe and I will immediately ban chokeholds and carotid holds. George Floyd would be alive today if we did that. We will require a national registry for police officers who break the law. We will, on the issue of criminal justice reform, get rid of private prisons and cash bail, and we will decriminalize marijuana, and we will expunge the records of those who have been convicted of marijuana. This is a time for leadership on a tragic issue of unarmed Black people in America who have been killed.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, let me pose the same question to you. In the case of Breonna Taylor, was justice done? You have 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Well, our heart breaks for the loss of any innocent American life. And the family of Breonna Taylor has our sympathies. But I trust our justice system, a grand jury that refused the evidence. And it really is remarkable that as a former prosecutor, you would assume that an impaneled grand jury looking at all the evidence got it wrong. But you're entitled to your opinion, Senator. I think, look, and with regard to George Floyd, there's no excuse for what happened to George Floyd. And justice will be served. But there's also no excuse for the rioting and looting that followed. I mean, it really is astonishing. Flora Westbrook is with us here tonight in Salt Lake City. Just a few weeks ago, I stood at what used to be her salon. Was burned to the ground by rioters and looters. And Flora is still trying to put her life back together. And I must tell you, this presumption that you hear consistently from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that America is systemically racist, and that, as Joe Biden said, that he believes that law enforcement has an implicit bias against minorities, is a great insult to the men and women who serve in law enforcement. And I want everyone to know who puts on the uniform of law enforcement every day that President Trump and I stand with you. And it is remarkable that when Senator Tim Scott tried to pass a police reform bill, brought together a group of Republicans and Democrats, Senator Harris, you got up and walked out of the room. And then you filibustered Senator Tim Scott's bill on the Senate floor that would have provided new accountability, new resources. But we don't have to choose between supporting law enforcement, improving public safety, and supporting our African American neighbors and all of our minorities. Under President Trump's leadership, we'll always stand with law enforcement, and we'll do what we've done from day one, and that is improve the lives of African Americans.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
Record unemployment, record investments in education, and we'll fight for school choice for all of our members.
Thank you, Vice President.
I'd like to respond.
Senator Harris.
I will not sit here and be lectured by the Vice President on what it means to enforce the laws of our country. I am the only one on this stage who has personally prosecuted everything from child sexual assault to homicide. I'm the only one on this stage who has prosecuted the big banks for taking advantage of America's homeowners. I'm the only one on this stage who prosecuted for-profit colleges for taking advantage of our veterans. And the reality of this is that we are talking about an election in 27 days, where last week the President of the United States took a debate stage in front of 70 million Americans and refused to condemn white supremacists.
Not true.
And
not true.
It wasn't like he didn't have a chance. He didn't do it, and then he doubled down. And then he said, when pressed, stand back, stand by. And this is a part of a pattern of Donald Trump's. He called Mexicans rapists and criminals. He instituted as his first act a Muslim ban. On the issue of Charlottesville, where people were peacefully protesting the need for racial justice, where a young woman was killed, and on the other side there were neo-Nazis carrying tiki torches, shouting racial epithets, anti-Semitic slurs. And Donald Trump, when asked about it, said there were fine people on both sides. This is who we have as the president of the United States. And America, you deserve better. Joe Biden will be a president who brings our country together.
Senator Harris.
And recognizes the beauty in our diversity and the fact that we all have so much more in common than what separates us.
Vice President Pence, let me give you a minute to respond.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that very much. You know, I think this is one of the things that makes people dislike the media so much in this country, Susan, is that you selectively edit, just like Senator Harris did, comments that President Trump and I and others on our side of the aisle make. I mean, Senator Harris conveniently omitted, after the president made comments about people on either side of the debate over monuments, he condemned the KKK, neo-Nazis, and white supremacists, and has done so repeatedly. You're concerned that he doesn't condemn neo-Nazis. President Trump has Jewish grandchildren. His daughter and son-in-law are Jewish. This is a president who respects and cherishes all of the American people. But you talk about having personally prosecuted. I'm glad you brought up your record, Senator.
Thank you.
But I really need to make this point. When you were DA in San Francisco, when you left office, African Americans were 19 times more likely to be prosecuted for minor drug offenses than whites and Hispanics. When you were Attorney General of California, you increased the disproportionate incarceration of blacks in California. Yeah. You did nothing on criminal justice reform in California. You didn't lift a finger to pass the First Step Act on Capitol Hill. I mean, the reality is your record speaks for itself. President Trump and I have fought for criminal justice reform.
Thank you, Vice President
We've fought for educational choice and opportunities for African Americans, all of our members.
Thank you, sir.
And we'll do it for 4 more
Thank
years.
you. You know, there is no more important issue than the final issue that we're going to talk about tonight, and that is the issue of the election itself.
But he attacked my record. I would like an opportunity to respond.
Let me give you 30 seconds because we're running out of time.
I appreciate that. First of all, having served as the Attorney General of the state of California, the work that I did is a model of what our nation needs to do, and we will be able to do under a Joe Biden presidency. Our agenda includes what this administration has failed to do. It will be about not only instituting a ban on chokeholds and carotid holes.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator
Harris. I would like to go through.
These are points that you made earlier in the hour, and I want to talk about the election itself before we have to.
But I want to talk about the connection between what Joe and I will do and my record, which includes I was the first statewide officer to institute a requirement that my agents would wear body cameras and keep them on full time. We were the first to initiate a requirement that there would be a training for law enforcement on implicit bias because, yes, Joe Biden and I recognize that implicit bias does exist, Mr. Vice President, contrary to what you may believe. We did the work of instituting reforms that were about investing in reentry. This is the work that we have done and the work we will do going forward. And again, I will not be lectured by the Vice President on our record of what we have done in terms of law enforcement and keeping our communities safe and a commitment to reforming the criminal justice system of America.
Thank you, Senator Harris. And I'd like to pose I'd like you to respond first to the question on our final topic, the election itself. President Trump has several times refused to commit himself to a peaceful transfer of power after the election. If your ticket wins and President Trump refuses to accept a peaceful transfer of power, what steps would you and Vice President Biden then take? What would happen next? You have 2 minutes.
So I'll tell you, Joe and I are, I think, particularly proud of the coalition that we've built around our campaign. We probably have one of the broadest coalitions of folks that you've ever seen in a presidential race. Of course, we have the support of Democrats, but also independents and Republicans. In fact, 7 members of President George W. Bush's cabinet are supporting our ticket. We have the support of Colin Powell, Cindy McCain, John Kasich, over 500 generals, retired generals, and former national security experts and advisors are supporting our campaign. And I believe they are doing that because they know that Joe Biden has a deep, deep-seated commitment to fight for our democracy and to fight for the integrity of our democracy and to bring integrity back to the White House. And so we believe in the American people. We believe in our democracy. And here's what I'd like to say to everybody. Vote. Please vote. Vote early. Come up with a plan to vote. Go to iwillvote.com. You can also go to joebiden.com. We have it within our power in these next 27 days to make the decision about what will be the course of our country for the next 4 years. And it is within our power, and if we use our vote and we use our voice, we will win. And we will not let anyone subvert our democracy with what Donald Trump has been doing, as he did on the debate stage last week, when again in front of 70 million people, he openly attempted to suppress the vote. Joe Biden, on the other hand, on that same debate stage, because clearly Donald Trump doesn't think he can run on a record because it's a failed record, Joe Biden on that stage said, hey, just please vote. So I'll repeat what Joe said. Please vote.
Thank you, Senator. Vice President Pence, President Trump has several times refused to commit himself to a peaceful transfer of power after the election. If Vice President Biden is declared the winner and President Trump refuses to accept a peaceful transfer of power, what would be your role and responsibility as vice president? What would you personally do? You have 2 minutes.
Well, Susan, first and foremost, I think we're going to win this election because while Joe Biden and Kamala Harris rattle off a long litany of the establishment in Washington, D.C., an establishment that Joe Biden's been a part of for 47 years, President Donald Trump has launched a movement of everyday Americans from every walk of life. And I have every confidence that those same Americans that delivered that historic victory in 2016, they see this president's record where we rebuild our military, we revived our economy through tax cuts and rolling back regulation, fighting for fair trade, unleashing American energy. We appointed conservatives to our federal courts at every level. And we stood with the men and women of law enforcement every single day. And I think that movement of Americans has only grown stronger in the last 4 years. But when you talk about accepting the outcome of the election, I must tell you, Senator, your party has spent the last 3.5 years trying to overturn the results of the last election. It's amazing. When Joe Biden was vice president of the United States, the FBI actually spied on President Trump and my campaign. I mean, there were documents released this week that the CIA actually made a referral to the FBI documenting that those allegations were coming from the Hillary Clinton campaign. And of course, we've all seen the avalanche, what you put the country through for the better part of 3 years until it was found that there was no obstruction, no collusion, case closed. And then, Senator Harris, you and your colleagues in the Congress tried to impeach the President of the United States over a phone call. And now Hillary Clinton has actually said to Joe Biden that in her words, under no circumstances should he concede the election. So let me just say, I think we're going to win this election. President Trump and I are fighting every day in courthouses to prevent Joe Biden and Kamala Harris from changing the rules and creating this universal mail-in voting that'll create a massive opportunity for voter fraud. And we have a free and fair election. We know we're going to have confidence in it. And I believe in all my heart that President Donald Trump's going to be reelected for 4 more years.
You know, I've written all the questions that I've asked tonight, but for the final question of the debate, I'd like to read a question that someone else wrote. The Utah Debate Commission asked students in the state to write essays about what they would like to ask you. And I want to close tonight's debate with the question posed by Brecklin Brown, She's an 8th grader at Springville Junior High in Springville, Utah. And here's what she wrote, quote, "When I watch the news, all I see is arguing between Democrats and Republicans. When I watch the news, all I see is citizen fighting against citizen. When I watch the news, all I see are two candidates from opposing parties trying to tear each other down. If our leaders can't get along, how are the citizens supposed to get along?" And then she added, "Your examples could make all the difference to bring us together," end quote. So to each of you in turn, I'd like you to take 1 minute and respond to Brecklin. Vice President Pence, you have 1 minute.
Brecklin, it's a wonderful question. And let me just commend you for taking an interest in public life. I started following the news when I was very young. And in America, we believe in a free and open exchange of debate. And we celebrate that. And it's how we've created literally the freest and most prosperous nation in the history of the world. But I would tell you that don't assume that what you're seeing on your local news networks is synonymous with the American people. You know, I look at the relationship between Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the late justice who we just lost from the Supreme Court, and the late Justice Antonin Scalia. They were on polar opposites on the Supreme Court of the United States, one very liberal, one very conservative. But what's been learned since her passing was the two of them and their families were the very closest of friends. I mean, here in America, we can disagree. We can debate vigorously, as Senator Harris and I have on this stage tonight. But when the debate is over, we come together as Americans. And that's what people do in big cities and small towns all across this country. So I just want to encourage you, Brecklin. I want to tell you that we're going to work every day to have government as good as our people. And the American people each and every day love a good debate. We love a good argument. But we always come together and are always there for one another in times of need. And we've especially learned that through the difficulties of this year.
Senator Harris, what would you say to Brecklin?
First of all, I love hearing from our young leaders. And when I hear her words, when I hear your words, Brecklin, I know our future is bright because it is that perspective on who we are and who we should be that is a sign of leadership and is something we should all aspire to be. And that, you know, that brings me to Joe. Joe Biden, one of the reasons that Joe decided to run for president is after Charlottesville, which we talked about earlier. It so troubled him and upset him like it did all of us, that there was that kind of hate and division. What propelled Joe to run for president was to see that over the course of the last 4 years, what Brecklin described has been happening. Joe has a long-standing reputation of working across the aisle and working in a bipartisan way. And that's what he's going to do as president. Joe Biden has a history of lifting people up and fighting for their dignity. You mean you have to know Joe's story to know that Joe has known pain, he has known suffering, and he has known love. And so, Brecklin, when you think about the future, I do believe the future is bright. And it will be because of your leadership, and it will be because we fight for each person's voice through their vote, and we get engaged in this election because you have the ability through your work and through eventually your vote to determine the future of our country and what its leadership looks like.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Thank you, Vice President Pence. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We want to thank also the University of Utah for its hospitality, and most of all, our thanks to all the Americans who watched this debate tonight. Again, our best wishes for a quick recovery to President Trump, the First Lady, and everyone who is battling COVID-19. The second presidential debate is next week on October 15th, a town hall-style debate in Miami. We hope you'll join us then. Good evening.
And that concludes the vice presidential debate in Salt Lake City, Utah, between Senator Kamala Harris and Vice President Pence. A full 90 minutes, maybe plus a bit. that was in sharp contrast, I would say, to the debate last week between the presidential candidates. There was some interruption. There was some over-talking. At the same time, we could hear the two candidates. They did get through 9 different subjects and discussed a fair amount of policy and differences. Everything from the approach to taxes and the economy, sharp difference about the taxation, energy policy, trade, whether the U.S. has lost the trade war, health care, and whether the Affordable Care Act was a success or a failure, the approach to the Supreme Court of the United States, and abortion, law and order. But right at the very beginning, what they really clashed over was COVID-19 and a very different approach to whether the president succeeded or failed in COVID-19, whether he was honest or not honest. This is a bit of what they had to say.
They knew what was happening and they didn't tell you.
When I look at their plan that talks about advancing testing, creating new PPE, developing a vaccine, it looks a little bit like plagiarism.
You respect the American people when you tell them the truth. You respect the American people when you have the courage
Which we've
to be a
always
leader,
done.
speaking of those things that you may not want people to hear, but they need to hear so they can protect themselves.
The reality is that we're going to have a vaccine, Senator, in record time, in unheard of time, in less than a year. The fact that you continue to undermine public confidence in a vaccine, if the vaccine emerges during the Trump administration, I think is unconscionable.
Still with us, our Bloomberg contributors Jeannie Zaino and Rick Davis. So, Rick, we haven't got to talk during this 90 minutes. Give us your sense of your main takeaway from this debate initially.
Yeah, look, I think that we actually had a debate tonight and not a slugfest, so that's a good thing. 2, there were very clear differences portrayed by each candidate. They laid out, as you pointed out, clear differences on trade and taxes and jobs. COVID, the number one thing, probably took up as much time as anything else combined. Healthcare and the iterations around ACA. But I would say the one thing that was not a difference was the fact that they used liberal interpretations of the facts. The vice president pointed out a number of times this device that, you can pick your issues, but you can't pick your facts. The reality is he did the same thing. I think the fact checkers are going to be as busy tonight as they were in previous debates, but probably a lot more busy than the first presidential debate because they actually talked about issues tonight.
Jeannie, your initial reaction. By the way, it's Daniel Patrick Moynihan, right? I said you can have your own opinion, not your own facts.
Yeah, Daniel Patrick Moynihan. I think he was quoted a couple times tonight, actually. I think that former Vice President Joe Biden has got to be very happy with the performance of his choice for Vice President Kamala Harris, her introduction to the American public for some people. And she, I thought, took it right to the vice president, but more importantly, the president from the start with the focus on the pandemic. And she said, I believe, something to the effect of the American people have never seen a failure as great as they've seen with this administration in terms of COVID. And she kept hammering the administration right on through. So I think he's got to be very happy with that. I think Vice President Pence, by the same token, he was much more empathetic than President Trump has been, both to Kamala Harris in terms of congratulating her on her nomination and also in terms of the American people. I think it's the first time I've heard the administration express empathy for the victims of the pandemic. So I think they both got some traction, but I have to say I don't think this changes the election all that much or the trajectory. I'm not sure that we're going to see a lot of vote change at the basis of this.
At the same time, Rick, I thought that the vice president was pretty effective. He's going to raise taxes, and Kamala Harris saying absolutely not true, not going to raise it on anybody under $400,000. And Vice President Pence kept back saying, well, Vice President Biden said he's going to repeal the tax cuts, and they benefited people under $400,000 a year.
Yeah, it was a little bit of an awkward moment when the very first thing that Kamala Harris said was that they were going to repeal the Trump tax cuts on day one, right? They didn't talk about doing anything on COVID on day one. They were going to repeal those tax cuts. And that was the opening that Vice President Pence picked up on and said, OK, you're going to raise taxes on the first day you're in office. That was not the message that the Biden campaign wanted to forecast. And she had to backpedal on that quite a bit. And look, the reality is that they both have separate approaches. I would say one distinction on trial tonight was the Biden plan for his first 4 years in the presidency. And what the Trump campaign was forced to do was defend the last 4 years. There was very little talk about the next 4 years by Pence and what the plan will be for that administration.
Jeannie, I'll put you on the spot. Any reaction about how much Vice President Pence really went over time and insisted on talking no matter what Susan Page said?
I think there is. And I thought Kamala Harris handled that well. And she said to him a few times, I will not be lectured by the vice president. She also made the case, let me speak. I had a sense it was almost as if she was a school teacher in some cases. So I do think that is going to be effective for her. I would say one area where I thought the Kamala Harris had some issues is on the question of the vaccine. She's had this problem before, and she said very clearly tonight she will not take a vaccine out of the Trump administration, and I think this is something that we're going to hear a lot more about.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay. For those of us on radio, what we're watching right now is the Vice President's motorcade, I think it is, leaving the hall. So Rick and Jeannie will be staying with us. In the meantime, let's go out to Salt Lake City where that motorcade is, and you get a report from Kevin Cirilli out there covering the debate. So Kevin, what were your initial reactions?
Much more policy-oriented in this go-around. And in fact, I think based upon the conversations that I was having with sources during the vice presidential debate, both of the respective campaigns feel that they got a full display of why they were each chosen as the vice presidential nominees. Senator Kamala Harris really drawing a sharp contrast to Vice President Mike Pence on the issues pertaining to racial inequality, on the issues pertaining to the Supreme Court nomination process. Meanwhile, you had Vice President Mike Pence hammering home the points of energy policies, especially as it relates to fracking, especially as it relates to her support of the Green New Deal, and on the issue of tax and economic policy. And meanwhile, there was a clear divide, a clear moment of contention as it relates to U.S.-China policy relations. Take a listen to Senator Harris and Vice President Pence and this key exchange on the geopolitical front.
The president's trade war with China. You lost that trade war. You lost it. What ended up happening is because of a so-called trade war with China, America lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs. Farmers have experienced bankruptcy.
Lost the trade war with China. Joe Biden never fought it. Joe Biden has been a cheerleader for communist China over the last several decades.
Now, there's no question that moving forward, China will continue to be a key part of the contrast that both sides try to make. We should note, however, that there are areas of nonpartisanship, especially on intellectual property. Senator Harris introduced legislation that had bipartisan support on protecting U.S. intellectual property. From here, both Vice President Pence and Senator Harris will actually travel to Arizona tomorrow for respective campaign rallies. Senator Harris will be joined by the nominee Joe Biden. And I'm told by a senior source on the president's re-election campaign that a rally from President Trump could come as early as next week.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Kevin, for that terrific reporting out in Salt Lake City. And so we're coming back to Rick and Jeannie right now. Rick, one of the things that did strike me is there were some questions that did not get answered, particularly Vice President Pence, I don't think answered the question, would there be an orderly, peaceful transition of power if they are declared the loser in this election?
Yeah, we saw this numerous times during the debate of the vice president going back to his old habit, which he perfected really in the previous debate 4 years ago, which was just ignore the question outright and talk about what he wanted to talk about. And that was completely on display when they talked about peaceful transition of power. We've heard the president make public statements consistently, as he did in 2016, that he'll think about whether he's going to accept the results of the election when he sees what the results of the election are. And that is obviously not something that the vice president wanted to address tonight. There's no way to spin yourself around that. And he did a good job, I think, of just ignoring the question outright.
Yeah, just distracting. And people got distracted. They didn't get back to it. OK, thanks so much. Rick Davis, Jeannie Zaney will be sticking with us because we now are joined by Larry Sabato. He's director of the University of Virginia Center for Politics and the editor-in-chief, of course, of Sabato's Crystal Ball. So thank you so much, Larry, for being with us. We read Crystal Ball regularly. You have some views about where this race is heading. What did you see tonight? Could it change the direction of this race?
No, I think it reinforced the direction. Vice presidential debates almost never change the direction of a campaign, but what they can do is add to the momentum that a candidate may have. I think any fair-minded person in watching the two candidates, listening carefully to the debate, would have said that the more confident person was Kamala Harris, probably because the Democrats have the wind at their back. That's the way it normally is. So I think the debate dwelt so heavily on COVID for so long in the beginning when most people are watching and remember, that's not helpful to the Republicans because it's a bad record.
Yeah, so you say vice presidential debates don't normally change the course of things. Is this one somewhat different, Larry? Given the age of the two candidates, something pointed out by the moderator, I must say, some questions asked, not answered, by the way, about succession from either side there. But could it be a little bit more important to American voters?
I think voters will say that. I think voters will acknowledge that we have two much older than usual candidates for president, and they ought to be paying more attention to the vice presidency. But I just don't see any indication that when we get a week away from this debate, almost anybody's going to be talking about the VP. That's what normally happens. The VP candidates step back. They go campaign around the country. They're on page B10, and their running mates are on A1, which is where it's supposed to be.
Yeah, Larry, do you think that the vice president missed an opportunity here to bring home some of the attacks that Harris made against Biden in the primary? Those did not seem to come up tonight, as far as I can recall.
I was very surprised that he didn't that Vice President Pence did not bring up some of the attacks that Kamala Harris made on Biden, and Biden answered kind of. He never really attacked back, but remember, it almost denied her the spot. I mean, there were clearly a lot of people in the Biden campaign who did not want Harris on that ticket because they resented the effective attack she made on race. But Biden didn't seem to bother Biden very much. And I think Vice President Pence could have used that well, and he didn't. And my goodness, he wasn't paying any attention to the time limits, so he had plenty of opportunity to bring it up.
Hey, Larry, this is Rick Davis. Thanks for being here with us tonight. And you mentioned that you thought that Kamala Harris had sort of the wind at her back, and we all love momentum. I've had it on campaigns, and I haven't had it on campaigns, and it does affect your demeanor. We've seen now a succession of national polls since the last debate indicating a widening lead of Joe Biden in the election, and even some state polls, like in Pennsylvania, that it looked like starting to pull away from Trump. What's your sense of the current state of the race, and whether or not you see that as a referendum on the last debate, and whether anything could affect it between now and the end of the election?
Well, you know, Rick, of course, you've been there in the seat of power, campaign manager, and doing all the things that you have to do to win. This has already proven to be the most cursed year with the most black swans of any election campaign, I think, since 1968. And so I'll be the last person to predict that we won't have another black swan landing in the election lake before November 3rd. So you always have to allow that. But given that the lead for Biden has been so stable for so long, and that it has almost always been between 7 and 10 points, yes, there have been some recent polls, several of them actually, that have had Biden leading from 12 to 16 points. Rick, you've been there. You know very well these are sugar high polls because Trump has just had the worst week or week and a half that any president has had during an election campaign that I can remember. Maybe I'm leaving something out, but it's a terrible
economic meltdown in 2008.
Yeah, well, that's true. The economic meltdown, but it's certainly for an incumbent president. Because presidents have more control over the agenda, but this president doesn't seem to have that. So, you know, I tend to think that Biden is doing well enough to win the Electoral College, perhaps easily, but I think he's winning enough, and it's been stable enough so that you can say something big has to happen to push Biden below 270. And that's where he's vulnerable, not the popular vote. I think the Trump people have known from the beginning that Biden would win the popular vote. It's just a question of what the margin is and whether he can win it by 3, 4, 5 or more points to guarantee him that 270.
So this is the question we always ask, Larry. How confident are we that people are being honest with the pollsters? We've seen various polls, including a Fox News one that was reported while they were on the air tonight, saying that people, although there was a 10-point margin nationally for Vice President Biden, people said that they thought their neighbors, it wouldn't say them, their neighbors might be voting for Trump even though they're not saying so.
Yeah, well, that's always a good question to ask because, of course, their neighbors are themselves.
Yes.
So they're talking about themselves. Look, and all of us, I think, Rick, I think you'll admit this too. You have PTSD from 2016. So we're not going to rule out anything. And certainly that there is some hidden Trump vote. I've read 3 studies just in the last week claiming there is absolutely no hidden Trump vote. And they're academic studies. And I don't believe them. I think it's a point or two. It's 1 or 2% that's a hidden Trump vote, and Trump gets another 2 points spotted to him, at least 2 points, because of the Electoral College. So add 3.5 points to whatever he's got. I think he's at 40, 41, something like that in the polling average, and that brings him close, not quite to where he was in 2016, but closer. His problem is we don't have any strong third-party candidates. So he has to do considerably better than he did in 2016 in order to win the Electoral College. He's got to be at 48, somewhere around there, and he finished at 46. So he has the climb up the hill. And if things continue to go as badly as they have gone for him, that hill is going to be Mount Everest by November 3rd.
So, Larry, I think I sort of have an answer to this, but what do you think, if anything, the Trump campaign can do now in these remaining 27 days to turn this ship around? I do think there are things they could do, but do you see that in the offing in the next 27 days at this point?
Oh, I think they can do things to add a point or two here and there. Biden may make some errors, or they can capitalize on something he says or does. Those things happen in every campaign, and Trump is artificially low for a Republican if you look at the big picture of presidential elections. So yes, I believe they can tighten it up, but it's getting the several percent they need above and beyond a tightening that they need, and I think those points will be very, very difficult for him to get. And we've said from the beginning, if the pandemic hadn't happened and the economic collapse hadn't happened, and several other things hadn't happened, he would be the clear favorite for re-election, as he was on January 1st. In my view, he was the clear favorite on January 1st to get another term, despite all the controversies. But he needs some miracles, maybe more than one. The vaccine apparently is out of the question. But there are other miracles, I suppose, that could happen. The biggest miracle would have been 4 years ago, going into a medical center before he took the oath of office and getting a character and personality transplant. But they don't offer those. I've looked for one for me. So they're not around. They're not around.
Larry, no one's going to compare your personality to Donald Trump. No. Any day of the week. Listen, one of the things all these polls are very fluid, and as you say, right now the Biden campaign is probably suffering from a sugar high. But part of that is also predicated on what model you're using to determine how many people are going to vote on Election Day, right? Because garbage in is garbage out. And we saw historic levels of voting in 2018 that really changed a lot of the dynamic at the state level. And of course, you're right. We as Republicans have a bit of a leverage on the Electoral College, as long as those states that we typically win 2, 3, 4 times in a row in a presidential race stay in our column. But what we now see is from a lot of the pollsters telling us that this election year will not only be historic, but in as much as 20% more than the historic numbers in 2018. What are you seeing as far as your models go on voter turnout and whether or not anything can really impact that? We hear a lot about suppression of the vote and whatnot. Usually that's a lot of noise and not a lot of fire. And I'm curious what you think.
I think there's so much interest, excitement, anger, pain, fear, every emotion, powerful emotion you can think of involved in this election that we will have a record or a near record turnout, certainly 150 million or more. And yes, half of it's going to be early voting and mail-in voting, and half of it election day voting, which is completely new and unprecedented. And whenever you have anything unprecedented, it opens the door to other unprecedented things. But I think that the turnout's going to be very high. I have seen no indication that anybody has been deterred from voting despite real voter suppression, but they're not deterred from voting.
Yeah, everybody's going to show up, we hope. Okay, thank you so much, Larry. It's always such a treat to have you with us. That's Larry Sabato. He's director of the University of Virginia Center for Politics. And now it's time to get a few final thoughts from Rick and from Jeannie. Jeannie, you go first.
You know, we're hoping that the 15th and the 22nd go ahead. And I learned from Kevin Surley, we may even see a Trump rally at this point next week, maybe. So I think those are things to watch out for if there's any hope of turning this thing around for the Trump campaign.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see whether they'll be wearing masks at that rally. So, Rick, what are some final thoughts from you?
Tonight we saw, David, a lot of smoke, but not a lot of fire. And the reality is nothing happened tonight that's probably going to change the balance of the election in key swing states that are being hotly contested tonight on the air war and in social media and on the campaign front. So it was a good event. I thought the candidates comported themselves well. The fact checkers are going to have a field day with this tomorrow morning. But the campaign's going to wake up tomorrow the same place they were when they went when they woke up this morning, and that's not good for the president.
So Jeannie, finally, often it's not what people say, but how you feel, how they make you feel. If we're concerned about suburban women, which we're talking about, who wins tonight?
I think Senator Harris wins tonight if you're concerned about suburban women.
So, Rick, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think she talked to suburban women in a way that was very effective, but there's been leakage by white males in the Trump campaign, and I think that was really the effort that Vice President Biden made tonight, was to try and pull them back into their column.
What about older voters? Because there's been some leakage there away from Donald Trump on that, Rick.
The older voters are gone. The over 65 voters that were the core of the Donald Trump campaign in 2016 have bolted. They don't like what they're seeing on coronavirus, and they make up now a significant part of the base of Joe Biden's campaign.
Okay, it's fascinating. Thank you so much to Rick Davis and Jeannie Zaino, our political contributors. We couldn't do this without them. It's just such a joy to cover things like this with them. Coming up tomorrow on Balance of Power at noon Eastern Time, we're going to talk to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi about whether she will go along with a relief bill, at least part of a relief bill, for airline workers. And Friday night at 8:30 Eastern, don't miss our special look at three key swing states. This is Bloomberg.
When everything around us, including the way we work and live, has been interrupted, uninterrupted service is peace of mind. Kimmy from customer support is responding to a 500% increase in daily call volume, no matter what. We keep on, so you can keep on.
Give you a sense of the real-time action. The 10-year yield tumbling now 11 basis points, so continuing in this knee-jerk risk-off feel.
It's almost 11 a.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong. I'm Haslinda Amin. Welcome to Bloomberg.